do introductions. We would do introductions, but I don't think it's necessary. We are recording, so I'll just say I'm Brooke Carroll, member of this meeting. I serve on the personnel committee, and I am a consultant and coach. I work with small independent schools on governance, strategic planning, and leadership, mostly, but other things too.
I'm Jen. I'm also a member of the meeting. Brooke and I have matching backpacks.
We're like best friends.
I'm on the nominating committee, and I consult with schools around the US and multiple countries on primarily diversity in schools. But I do have a school that for the past 7 years I've been their Quaker in residence. This is my last year. So that's been really fun to just be able to be Quakerly without having to translate language. And I am a high school counselor at Oneness Montessori High School in Kensington. So, and I always ask students what we should talk about, and I asked them and they told me a couple of things, so they're in here. If this will work. Maybe not. Okay. Why is it? Okay. We've got great slides. They're so exciting. Too bad you can't see them. All right. I don't know what's going on. Let me fix this way.
Just what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about adolescent brain development and the relatively recent understandings that we have about the adolescent brain. And then kind of changing in our understanding about the context as well, complicating factors. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what we as adults can do to help, whether they're our own adolescents or the adolescents that we're caring for in our communities.
Okay, so we thought we'd just like to have a moment to connect. So you can find a picture if you have your phone that just makes your heart smile and share it with somebody. If not, you can describe a picture. Describe a picture in your mind, a memory that makes you feel good. There's always intentionality with this work, and I like to focus on the brain a lot. And whenever we're talking about a conversation that even the title seems a little bit loaded, it's good to have an emotional connection with somebody. So, so I would like you to just a second. I can show you mine of my adjacent grandchild. That's what I call him. He's calling me Gem. See? my cousin I helped raise, and he became a dad in May. So, and nothing makes my heart smile more. I get pictures every day and many times for my job. I'm so glad that I have the picture.
Yeah, so the funny wow, it's so
looks like there's a
oh my god.
This is a great picture.
Actually, I am also like
I'll show you that. Oh my god. And I'll No, this is working. It's just, I don't know why it's, yeah, I don't know what's happening. Okay, yeah, let's just do this.
Is anyone on Zoom that wants to introduce themselves, or do we
Yeah.
just go around and say our names or something?
Sure.
I just wanna make sure that
You
we're
wanna go ahead?
including the Zoom people. Hi, I'm Julie.
I'm Brooke.
You know, too. Margo?
We're introducing ourselves. We're introducing ourselves. We're introducing.
I am Margo Lehman,
Yeah.
member of the meeting. I've been a child and a teenager, and a young adult friend, and now I'm an older adult friend.
Ooh, working, spending lots of time working with young friends.
And yeah, and I'm here because I have the privilege of working with the children of all these people sitting behind me. And I have since they were little, and they keep me engaged and young. They're wonderful.
Absolutely.
I'm so good. I'm like,
Great.
Thank you for sharing that privilege. My children benefit greatly from having you as a teacher.
All right, in the back.
Hi, I'm Alicia. I have teenagers.
Yeah, I'm Sam, our teenagers are Howard and Amy.
Great.
I'm Catherine, and I have a young adult and a newly minted teenager at age 13.
I'm Patty. I grew up with two sisters, a very female-dominated house, and then God gave me three boys. And I thought I would raise them general neutral and in the girl way, and they said no. And it's been a very big growing experience.
Patty, how old are your kids?
15, 19, and 22.
I'm Luke Harrington. I have a grandson who just turned 13. I'm bracing myself for the onslaught. What's that?
Is he the oldest of the grandchildren?
Well, no,
So look, Sean.
I have an 18-year-old who's going to come out.
I'm not much of a Silva. My youngest grandchild is 16, but I'm really interested in the whole mental health issues with young people.
And I was an adolescent with Mochiko's children. So what? Oh, Jim.
And then we have somebody on Zoom.
Yeah.
I'm Jim. I have no teenagers.
But you work with teenagers. Sometimes. And online.
Christina was online.
Yeah, and Joan, are you still there? Christina is there, yeah.
Okay, well, Christina might have stepped away.
Okay.
Okay.
Christina. Hello?
Hi.
Hi, I'm Christina Gilbertson, and I am a psychotherapist. I've worked with teenagers and college-age students and all-age people for about 23 years as a therapist. My favorite group, I think, is teenagers and college student age. And so I'm glad you're having this. And I used to be on marriage and family relations. I think this is great and much needed. So thank you.
Great. Glad you're here, Christina. So what comes to your mind when you think about adolescent development?
Confusion.
Confusion?
Yeah.
Rebellion?
What?
Rebellion?
Rebellion?
Identity development.
Identity development, yeah.
I'm thinking about my now 42-year-old son. My sister, my mother, and I, and my brother-in-law, and he decided to go down to Smithsonian. And when we all said we need to take a break and sit down, somebody had hurting knees, somebody had hurting back, and he sat there and said, he was 16 at the time. He said, "Ha ha ha! Don't you all wish you were my age again?" And we didn't look at each other, and we were all in unison said, "No." And he was absolutely shocked. But that's because everything that is just said, we all understood that, yeah, it was nice to have the physical capacity, but all the other stuff going on is really challenging.
I would like to add insecurity to that too. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Trying to understand who you are.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk, one thing we forgot to say was just that we also our children are younger, so adolescence is not that far. My youngest is 19. My oldest is 24, and then we helped raise my cousin who's 37, so we've got the span, but still have a teenager in our house, so literally in our house today.
Yes.
Oh, really? Came home last night, spring break.
And my children are 25 and 22, so not that far out. So just the brain science, really supports, and about a little over 20 years ago, we had a really revolutionary understanding of what is going on in adolescent brains, and that's, I'm gonna talk about that. And it really helps explain the confusion, the rebellion, those kinds of things. So it really helps us understand. And when in the mid 2000s, I did some investigation on this and gave some presentations to people. And it was before my children became teenagers. And so it was really kind of interesting. And then I went into their adolescence knowing this. And unfortunately, it doesn't really help you deal with it that much, except that it gives you some peace of mind that you know what's going on. And so it's not just, why are you doing this to me? It's, oh, and it gave me a little bit of empathy for that. So, okay, oh, good, it works. So we've known for a long time that there's incredible amount of growth in the structure and function of the brain while the child is in utero and during the first several years of life, that the brain actually, the structure of it is changing. We know that. Oops.
Yeah. Okay, so planting ourselves in that. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of slide problem. We want to also just remind us of where we are in time right now. So what I'm going to show you one thing. There are 4 domains that are really different for kids today. They are the changing relationship with athletics. Kids are urged to major in a sport as young as 7 or 8. And the body's not meant to do the same thing over and over again, and their identity becomes entwined around it. So if you're a swimmer and that's how you describe yourself at 7 or 8, and then your body can't do it or you lose interest, now who are you? So really wanting kids to have multiple parts of their identity that they embrace. Another one is childhood development. The chemical and physical changes of adolescence are happening earlier and lasting longer. So when I first became a counselor 34 years ago, I had one 5th grade girl that had begun menstruation, and now 3rd and 4th is really common. But the education has not changed with how young they are. We still do it in middle school, which by the way was never developmentally appropriate. It was just decided when we went from high schools to junior high schools and middle schools, like it's too young for elementary, too old for high school. We'll stick it here, 6th grade. Not a time to do this. Another one is the relationship with devices. And then this one, I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but I want to just show you that this is a study that I did looking at 100 years of US history, looking for when each of the identifiers, so race, gender, sexual orientation, and more, had significant changes. And from 1920 to 2000, they all did, or many did, but they're spread out. So like the women's movement, of course, never ended, but it's marked in the 70s. Civil rights movement never ended, marked in the 60s. But since 2000, almost all of them have had significant changes. So this is about ability, this is about belief system, race, gender identity, politics, gender equity, sexual orientation, race, gender identity, sexual orientation. Masks came down to health and politics, gender identity, police brutality, gun violence, climate change, they, them as a pronoun for non-binary people, presidential candidates, January 6th, so politics, gender and race, Kamala Harris being the first woman vice president and the second vice president of color. We don't talk about the first one very much. The double pandemic of racism, of systemic racism and COVID, and again, gender. So what this means is that young folks today have a completely different relationship with language, separated from experiences, but they're being raised and educated by adults for whom they often have the experiences and lack of or fear of language. So it's this really interesting time. So for example, President Obama, of course, is multiracial. I use the term Black because he said he knows that's how the world sees him. Current 19-year-olds will not remember before having a president of color. So even though they've had 2 white presidents since, the anchor, the norm for them is having a president of color. And they're being raised and educated by adults for whom having a president of color is the anomaly. And having a white president is the norm, and we're seeing that all bear out. One other thing that I just wanted to point out, I mean, we could spend hours on this and we won't, but one other thing I want to point out is right here, 2014, we started the majority minority shift, which was where we went from having numerically more white people in this country than all people of color combined. Then we kind of leveled out. And now by 2028 to 36, depending on whose research you follow, there will be more people of color than white. That's somewhat numerical. A lot of it has to do with that we're now creating opportunities for people to say who they really are and not having to check one box or other. So it's both. But right at this exact time, there's a researcher that I'm working with at George Washington. This is when all the narrative language of the political strife started. President Trump came down the escalator 2 months after this was published. So there's a direct link between a lot of the narrative in this country and this. So we have a lot of kids who have very different understanding. And the one other thing I wanted to show you is that this is the beginning of the alpha generation. So they overlap. Generation Z was and alpha overlap by 2 years. One of the things we know about the alpha generation, 2 things: they have a totally different relationship with gender identity than any generation before them. And they no longer, it used to be up until a couple of years ago, if I was in a school, kids would say to me, I'm non-binary, and then ask if I knew what that meant. They don't anymore because they don't know that we don't know. Because it's been, for us, it's a new conversation. For them, it's their whole living memory. And the other thing we know about the alpha generation, and they are also, it's exemplified here, they are fixated on civil movements, protest, and activism. And one of the links you can see for that is, so alpha generation 2010, they saw kids start an international movement with a single hashtag, March for Our Lives. So that's one of the ways that their relationship with devices interacts. It's a whole lot. I can give you an article that describes everything.
And I just want to say one added thing, the majority minority piece where that shows up in our schools is that, and I can't remember the year that in kindergarten it was majority minority.
They were 2009. They would have been, yeah. So it's right before the alpha generation.
So that's moving up through our schools, and that they are no longer, you know, that they are in a much more mixed racial and ethnic kind of situation in schools, and so that's just the underlying law.
And the number one thing I hear from students is that they will say they believe that adults often don't care about what they're telling them about their identity. And then when I speak with those adults, it's because they don't have the language. So best thing we can do is say to kids, I didn't learn to speak about this or talk about this. Let's talk about it together. If we could all do that, then we've seen that really improves relationships between adults and teenagers. Right, that was a lot.
That's amazing.
Thanks. I've got the whole study if you want it. I mean, it's summarized in an article. But.
Jim, can you move our pictures like up to the top? So we talked about, we know that children's brains, you know, at the very early ages, going through a lot of structural changes. And we thought that by the time they reached puberty, the brain was structurally similar to adults. And that all those changes, all the, you know, confusion and rebellion was because of hormones and society. But what we now know is that the structure's changing too. So we know that puberty marks a beginning of another massive growth spurt in the brain structure in addition to hormones. So they're getting it from all sides.
All while they're supposed to learn math.
Right, and deal with these identity issues. And now much more the social political is intruding into education. So Barbara Strauch said, the changes occurring in the teenage brain are so profound and wide-ranging that they poke into nearly every area of behavior, adding a new and abundantly welcome perspective into the enduring puzzle of adolescence. So you will hear people talk about adolescence as a construct, as a, and in different societies, people in 200 years ago, when adolescence started later, but it wasn't with the same kind of turmoil and all of that kind of thing. There is a brain-based component to adolescent. Society puts norms on adolescence as well, for the better or worse. And in different societies around the world and over time, those two mesh up well or not. And I would posit that we don't do it very well here. So at birth, a baby has 50 trillion connections. A 3-year-old child has about 1,000 trillion connections, which is twice as many as an adult. This may be out of order. We're going to come back to this. Let's move on. This is out of order. Yeah, these got all mixed up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened, but.
Let's come back.
You're losing this
The
connection.
teenage brain.
Let's come back to this. Yeah,
Come
I
back
just,
to this. Come back to.
yeah.
Okay.
So, oh yeah.
This is not at all the order that they were in.
And I changed this picture yesterday too, so, okay, well, Wayne,
It's all right.
thank you for being forgiving. So the neuron is the basic cell structure of the nervous system, right? And I think I have another picture of a neuron. And at birth, oh, well, no, that's right. At birth, the baby has 100 billion brain cells, 100 billion neurons. This is about all the brain cells they will ever have. So we were born with the brain cells that we're going to have. And we can add some, but pretty much that's it. However, only a few of them are connected. So we've got all of these brain cells, but only a few are connected. Development and change occurs in the brain with increased connections, and the connections are through the dendrites. And that's what happens. So here you can see neurons at birth, but then neurons at 3 years. It's all the connections between them that make that density. So a baby has 50 trillion connections, but a 3-year-old has 1,000 trillion connections. And that's more than we have. So they've got all these connections, but they're not all firing. It's called overabundance of dendrites or bushy dendrites. You've got all these possibilities of connections. And that's why our 2 and 3-year-olds are scattered and emotional and the terrible twos and all of that kind of thing, because they've got this, all of these possibilities, all of this stuff going on, and it's overwhelming and distracting. The same thing happens at like age 10, 11, 12, which is why they look and act a little bit like big 2-year-olds. So, right? Okay.
And one of the hard parts when they're at that stage is that their bodies look like grown people, but they're not. And so, it's when we're looking at their grown self, remembering that sometimes and often the little self is the one that's listening to us.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So this overproduction of dendrites is called exuberance, and it's seen as gray matter. The brain creates more dendrites than needed, and the ones that are reinforced through use are strengthened. So it's use it or lose it. So when you make those connections, they're strengthened. The other ones are pruned back. Overabundance in specific brain parts is related to acquiring new cognition, emotion, behavioral skills. We know this happens in young children, and then we realize it happened again in adolescence. And then we're repeated here. Yeah, Okay, so
Okay, this is like an adventure we're on.
it is, who knows what's gonna come
Being
up?
very present, being very quickly in the moment.
No, we know this is intentional, so we get into that whole
Of
scatter.
course,
Yeah.
yeah, right, that's right. Which is
Margo,
what
that
we simulate.
Margo, that was a secret that we told you.
Simulated. So, the second phase of gray matter of bushy, the bushy dendrites, starts before puberty and peaks around age 11, maybe going back to 10 now, 12 in boys, in which it thins. So this is why your previously well-behaved, emotionally stable, organized 9-year-old all of a sudden is moody, can't remember to bring their homework to school, right? Because they've got all this stuff going on in their brains. Their brains just running. In addition to hormones, in addition to pressures of social stuff, but it starts structurally. And that's the part we didn't know before. Wait, go back one more. Even though the brain of a teenager between 12 and 20 or even 25, because this pruning back goes into the mid-20s, is maturing, they're losing gray matter because it's the use it or lose it. Whatever they're focused on. So if they're playing music, if they're playing sports, if they're playing video games, whatever they're focused on, that's going to be reinforced in the brain. What will be next? Yeah, so what I said, Jake Eade was at NIH. He was the one who discovered this, and he didn't believe it when he first discovered it, that this gray matter expanse. He had to really relook at this because we believed so strongly that the brain didn't functionally change. So he said, if a teen is doing music or sports or academics, those are the cells and connections that will be hardwired. If they're laying on the couch or playing video games or MTV, or, doing all the other bad things that our young people could do, those are the cells and connections that are going to survive. So here are some of the brain areas that are particularly impacted. Hypersensitivity and seeking novel experiences. And you can see where this would be evolutionarily, important. We want to create adults, so we want them to go out and learn how to hunt and gather and those kinds of things. Attraction to risky, thrilling activities. So your teenagers who like to go to amusement parks, things like that, that's a positive way to do that. Processing reward stimuli differently than adults. So they are not rewarded by the same thing that we are. And then they're highly susceptible to social influence. Again, which you can see why that's evolutionarily positive, they're the tribe kind of. So things that we've learned, that these physical and chemical changes begin earlier. Janet said that. Most studies show that abstract reasoning, so the last place that comes online is the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning, planning, regulation. That's the last one, right? Abstract reasoning, memory, and formal capacity for planning, but these capacities are impacted by emotional states and social influences. So that's why, again, they look like adults, sometimes they act like adults, and then they don't. And you're like, what's wrong with you, right? You just did that yesterday. The words that come out of our parent mouths. So they might show great judgment planning, but you can't count on it because it's inconsistent.
And it's often interpreted as disrespect or lack of care or regard. That's the language we use with them instead of, with my students, I've been saying, I would like you to start using language to be aware that when that happens, it's your brain doing that. So you can say that because you still have a responsibility. You still have to do the things you're being asked to do. You're just not gonna remember multiple step directions at one time.
So teenagers can evaluate risks objectively. So they can say, I know driving at 100 miles an hour is not a good idea. It's risky. But that doesn't necessarily lower the likelihood that they'll do them. Until they're late teens, young people don't develop the part of the brain that reduces stress during peer evaluation or social isolation. So again, the immediate danger of classmates teasing can seem more threatening than the health or legal consequences of a risk. That peer, and it's not just peer pressure, it's their own brain functioning that is saying, I need to be part of this group. And that's more important than anything else. More important than all the lectures that I've heard about not doing drugs, not drinking alcohol. What's most important is I need to fit in. And then it becomes a kind of an existential, life-threatening. And we're seeing that with social media and suicide, quite frankly. That existential threat of being out of the group is now right here in the palm of our hands, and it's having terrible, terrible consequences. So one of the interesting things, and I won't read this, but one of the interesting things that I found in this investigation was that teenagers misread our emotions and our faces, the speed drops. Oh goodness, we're going all over the place. But that they can look at your face and say, why are you mad at me? And you're like, I'm not mad.
Yeah.
That they have this, that part of their brains are, as it's coming online, kind of stutters a little bit. So, compare that with this need to be included and all of that. I'm just gonna, this is my favorite quote about all of this. And then I think we're gonna move on because I think you all get the picture with the brain development. But this is Jay Geed again. He said, the executive brain doesn't fully hit adult levels until age 25. So at puberty, you have adult passions, sex drive, energy and emotion, but the reining in of that with your prefrontal cortex doesn't happen until much later. So we can vote at 18 and drive a car, but you can't rent a car until 25 or so. So regarding brain anatomy, the only ones who have to drive a car. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So I know something I've been thinking a lot about is how this all intersects with COVID. And
Yeah.
Because so I have a freshman and a junior, and I have friends who are teachers, and they say this year in junior class is the worst because our kids were in the very place where they're supposed to be forming social connections and separating from their parents, and they were stuck in online home.
Yeah.
And so is there anything?
That's what we're getting to.
Yeah. This is the foundation, and then we're getting to that. And it's not. There's no silver bullet. It is. They lived through that, and I think that the fear that was just permeated our whole society had a major impact. And it depends on where you were at each developmental stage, on how much all of those things, the social isolation and the fear, and the frustration.
So a few things with that, COVID being one of them. And there's a lot, we don't yet know what's going to happen from the results of COVID. One thing we do know, and I hear this in every school I'm in, is adults saying this is the worst class they've ever had. And the kids hear that. And they're not the worst class they ever had. It's requiring teachers to teach them differently. And so they did miss out on some of the social stuff, but actually some of the research shows that they had different social connections, because when they were on their screens, they were this close to each other. It looked like they were this close to each other, which we would never do in our space. And they were in each other's bedrooms on Zoom. and which we wouldn't do normally either. So their boundaries are kind of weird in that way. I have to say, I think one of the strongest issues is that teachers haven't learned how to teach them differently. And teachers, we like to do things the same way. I can do a whole workshop with a group of teachers about one thing, and at the end, they'll go back to what they were doing before. So one of the things that kids are talking about a lot, by kids, I mean anywhere from 13 to early 20s, is the stereotypes about them. First of all, as a society, we have awful stereotypes of teenagers. And I was a middle school principal at Sandy Spring, and we used to talk about this, how we were trying to change the narrative around middle school kids, because they're really cool. They're the most authentic people ever. What they say is what they mean, and what they, it changes minute to minute. You can't keep up, but it's really amazing. And we all kind of, the narrative we had here about adolescence was really negative, and that's normal for our society. But for kids, they don't know that. That's all they're hearing, is this is this thing that's going to be awful. Other things with COVID is that we're past the time of them remembering really well what happened before, what they were like before. So this is who they are now. And basically what we're saying to them is, you don't fit into our box. And so it's us who has to do different things. They do need classroom management skills in a different way. However, there's other things that happened during COVID that we have now gone backward and done in with this. One of which is, when they were home, they ate when they were hungry, as opposed to in school, get up at 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning, you're forced to eat. You go to school, you're forced to eat at 11, whether you're hungry or not. You go to school, then you're forced to eat again. And at home, they were learning to eat when they were hungry. Now they're back at school, so we're making them eat when we tell them to eat. So we're basically saying, don't listen to your bodies, is the thing. And I had 2 counselors who I supervise asked me to meet with students who they thought had eating disorders, and because they weren't eating at lunch. And I was like, actually, they have normal eating patterns now. It's that it doesn't fit into school life, because they were getting everything they needed. Other things that we know from COVID is small things, big things. Like, we all walk around with water bottles, or many of us walk around with water bottles. Students are encouraged to have water bottles in schools. We know a lot of fountains still aren't back online. But going to get water was one of the ways that students could take a break to take care of themselves. And so, like, if a student said, I'm going to get a drink of water, that was cue for us as educators, kid needs a break. Or we would say, hey, why don't you go get a drink of water? They can't do that anymore. So we're also keeping them in this place longer. Another thing that happened during COVID was the actual instruction time was either shorter or longer than it is now. So we taught them to learn at a different cadence. So that's a big part of it. I had several students with social anxiety who told us at our school, I need you guys to stop saying how hard this is on us, because I'm finally happy. Like, I'm home in my room. I can see people when I want to. I don't have to talk if I don't want to. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. So we also have this narrative around it that's really wonky, and it's become political, and that's a big thing too. So there are some things with COVID. There are some social delays that are happening. However, they also missed that era of being in high-risk behavior situations because they weren't with each other as much. So there's that too. It just, I mean, not all of them, but there were fewer parties, and the parties they weren't driving in cars together as much. So there's pluses and minuses with it. And I think a lot of it is that they need to know that we have a different relationship with teenagers, and we need to know that they have a different relationship with educators. The other thing is that's happening now is a whole lot of diagnostic language being used in the common lexicon. So I had a student who walked into my class and he said, sorry, I'm late, Jen, sorry. I was having an ADD moment. ADD being attention deficit disorder. I was like, well, first of all, there is no such thing as an ADD moment. You either have it and it's part of your life, or you don't. Or another student who said to me last year, oh my gosh, I had a panic attack. I was so freaked out. I had a complete panic attack. And so I'm of course stopping everything. You're having a panic attack. That's a major, like, we're looking at, do we need to go to the hospital? What do we need to do? No, this kid was having an anxiety attack. which wasn't even really attack, it was appropriate for the situation. It lasted the appropriate amount of time, but they're using just big words, or I'm so depressed, to describe being appropriately sad for an appropriately sad situation. So what that means is that we're missing the graduation of feelings. So like I'm feeling sad, and then I'm feeling more sad, and then it's lasting longer. Also, other factors that play into it is, you know, when we were teenagers, if we didn't get invited to a party, Brooke probably always was, I was a total nerd, so I was not invited to parties. I was a complete nerd, still am, but I didn't know till Monday that I wasn't invited to a party, but now I find out in real time. And my parents find out, and my parents get involved with other parents about it. Like, your kid posted on Snapchat that your kid's with these other kids, my kid's not there, what's going on? Becomes this whole big thing that goes with it. Other factors are the parent gap, and what I mean by that is the 4 domains that I was just mentioning in terms of particularly around identity. But another is, we still have as adults, this is generalization of course, but we still have the mindset that our children will go to school, then they'll either go to college or get a job, and then they might buy a house, and then they might get married, and then they might have kids. And first of all, jobs look totally different because people can work everywhere now. So schools that have dress codes for professional dress, I'm like, well, for a lot of them, that would be pajamas on the bottom, and a shirt on the top. That's what I wear. That's what I wear. So we've got that happening. Also, fewer, the number of people under age 20 who have licenses and are choosing to drive cars is dramatically lower than before. I have one driver and one who has chosen not to drive. Also, owning a home does not have the same cachet that it has in the past. That's really what the alpha generation too, of looking at mobility of life in a really different way. We see tiny houses and van houses and more. And there's a huge body of research that's happening in a lot of hospitals where young 20-something-year-olds, the number of them who are choosing to be parentless is going down choosing to be parentless going up dramatically. And a lot of that is because of the state of the world that we've left them in. And I know, and you know, this conversation I have with my students all the time. They had a presentation last week and about financial management, and somebody said, you know, like when the teacher said, you know, like when you grow up and you get married and you have kids, or you have a partnership and you have kids, and so one kid raised his hand, he's like, we just discussed this last week in our class. There are 12 of us in this class, and only one of us wants to have children, ever. So that's happening. And then the absence of scaled skills is, and this is for parents too, and by parents, I mean anyone who's taking care of a child, is that we often wait to react when it's big. Like when we're giving consequences, we don't help react with them. And so an example of that would be, you know, the fierce drive to be with their friends, and we see their friends engaged in behavior that we don't approve of. What do a lot of parents say to kids?
You can't go out with that
I
guy.
can't hang out with those people.
Who becomes the sexiest person around? The sexiest. So thinking about scaled responses, scaled ways of focusing on this, like the strategy that we used in our house with the 37-year-old who was with us a lot through high school was, there were people's houses, and with our 24-year-old too, there were people's houses who we didn't want our kids to go to because we knew of stuff, but those kids were welcome at our house anytime. And then the parents were welcome at our house too. But you know, my 24-year-old going to a house where only teenagers are taking care of all the kids, not really my thing, but bring them all to our house, fine. So that we weren't in that battle about the sexiness of whoever it is. So these are some of the complicating factors. On the positive side, we can help, like when we're hearing diagnostic language, ask what that means. What does that look like? What does that sound like? So if somebody says, I'm so depressed, I like to ask, if I were watching you, but I couldn't hear, what would I see happening? And if I could hear you, but I couldn't see, what would I hear happening? Like what kind of words would I hear? What kind of tone of voice? We can also look at, you know, just where we are now with COVID decision-making, and really think about scaled responses in terms of, you know, not moving toward the dramatic of something needs to stop without like adding things in. And then one other, I always write the little notes on the board to remind myself, one other thing that when Brooke was talking about kids looking at us and thinking we're angry is, this is something I talk with my students about a lot, is over 78% of what we interpret to be the experience is nonverbal. And so it could be your body, but it could also be your tone of voice. It could be your cadence of your voice. It could be the emojis you do or do not use. Whether you heart a picture. So for example, like if I said to Brooke, like, Brooke, I'm gonna go get some coffee after this. But my words are really nice, right? And so so one thing with teenagers that we can do is help them match their messages. Like help their body and their voice and their face match. And by simply asking, like, you know, I'm really confused right now. Can you say in other words what it is you want me to know? Like just something like that, so that they can reinterpret it. Also, if they ask us something like, are you mad at me? It would be helpful if we asked, what am I doing that's making you think that? So that I can also adjust the way I'm being, so I can let you know. And it's not uncommon for a teenager with the part that Brooke was talking about going from being like a little kid to an adult and back and forth in a moment. This is why we often see big body middle school kids or 9th and 10th grade kids who will want to snuggle and cuddle. And then also not want to touch you at all in the same moment. So we're just trying to think all these things through. And then one last piece that goes with this is how clear we are or are not about our values. There's tons of research that shows that parents think their kids know their values and kids don't know what they mean. Because often we talk about values in a deficit way. Like we don't value that in this family, or that's not consistent with our values. Instead of this is our value. And we want to separate out the way we live our values. For example, if you value teamwork and being able to win and lose well, your value is not playing Monopoly together. Your value is teamwork and winning and losing well, right? So helping kids to understand that, because that's where the sports thing comes in. They'll say, my family values swimming. Can you tell I still have post-swim mom trauma? So our family values swimming. No, our family values being on a team, exercise, you know, trying your best, living your dream, all those things, but our family does not value swimming. That's not our value. So those are some things that come up, but also ways we can turn it around. I mean, I think adolescence is a really hopeful time. Kids today are fiercely activated and really angry with and I'm generalizing, but I do work with thousands of kids a year. They're very angry at the state of the world that adults have left them with, and that we don't listen to them for solutions. So partnering with them a lot more is a really helpful thing. We're also just really cool people. I mean, I've remained a counselor for 34 years because I just love the energy they bring and how open they are. And then the one last piece I'll add is that they also are, you know, they need to go on record as being opposed to things. So what we often do as parents is we'll ask them, you know, like, hey, would you like to go out to dinner tonight? Many teenagers are going to say, no. I mean, dinner maybe. Okay, let's say, do you want to go to this party? Do you want to go to this family party tonight? No. So don't ask them. Say, like, we're going to go do a family thing. Would you like to go to this family party, or would you like to do this? So you only give choices that you're okay with, but not asking, do you want to go to a family party? Because then they're just gonna, and also when they go and have fun, not pointing out to them what a great time they have. Because that's basically saying, I was right, I was right, you were wrong. But instead, this is something I do a lot with my students where I negotiate with them. So I had a student who said to me, I'm never gonna go to therapy. And I was like, okay. He goes, so don't talk to me about it. And I said, so I'm not gonna discuss therapy with you. What I'm gonna do is schedule meetings for us to have every week for the next 6 weeks. We're gonna, and I'm not a therapist at school, but I am a therapist, so I'm like, we're gonna work on things, and if at the end of 5 weeks, we're gonna assess. And if we don't feel, if I don't feel or you don't feel that we're meeting the goals that we have, then we'll talk about therapy. And then that kid's willing to schedule with me. So, but it's a lot of like super walking both ways, kind of thing, so. That's what I had.
So let's stop with the presentation and just questions or applications. We have a lot more